Evening folks, welcome to another Irish Whiskey Review with me, Marty McAuley. This is part 2 of the Johnnie Walker Red Label review. Now, some of you may be wondering what I meant by part 2. Why was there part 1 and part 2? Well, in part 1, obviously, we reviewed the best-selling Scotch whisky in the world. Ta-da! We're going to review the best-selling Scotch whisky in the world from days gone by. This is an old bottle of Johnnie Walker. I bought this at auction. You see the difference in the little striding man? See? Now he's a bit more, a bit more suave, a bit more. See? Now, you can buy these bottles at auction. I bought this a couple of weeks ago. And remember, folks, whiskey doesn't, if it's stored properly, whiskey doesn't alter in taste. It's basically immortal. It can live forever. And then you can get a comparison. So, as I say, I wanted to do this so I can do a side-by-side comparison. The reason for that is there's big drives now to tell people that the barley we use today is not the same as the barley of days gone by, that things are too commercialised, they're totally different. And this is going to give a side-by-side. Now, I mentioned that using a blend, having that range of colour, if you like, with all the different distilleries, gives an element of consistency. It gives the head blender the chance to not use one colour, if you like, but to pick up what they want to put in a glass, or into the bottle, sorry. Now, being able to do that with a wide palette, with all those different distilleries, up to 35, or maybe more, who knows how many they use, but that gives you a consistency. But what's the difference between these two? Is it that over a period of time things slowly change? People's taste slowly changes. Lots of times people talk about Scotch whisky, they keep talking about the peat. It's all peat. There's a misconception that all Scottish whiskies are peated, and they're not. The majority really aren't. Oh, itchy back. But did that reputation come from? I mean, Johnnie Walker does have an element of peat in it. Yes, we know. But how peated was it back in the day? Now, this bottle comes from the 60s. So you think about it. Some of the barley that was grown to go into this was probably grown in the 1950s. The best part of 70 years ago. And there's very few products that you can do that with. You're tasting something that a farmer, best part of 70 years ago, was putting into the ground. And you're getting that element of stuff that went in, the trees that grew, the barrels, the casks. Casks can be used for decades. And this thing is going to get to breathe. So, this is going to... I'm going to pour myself a wee healthy pour of this, actually. I always like doing this to opening the genie in the bottle. That's been caged in there, contained in there for so long, for 50 years and more. I suppose it's 60 years now. But that's been kept in there. And now it's got out. And here it is. And then right away, there's a slight difference in colour. I wouldn't necessarily hold a huge amount of that because the colour and so on and so forth. And this is the modern version. And as I say, it's quite light, a lot of smoke, non-offensive in any way. And a little bit of peat there. Now this. I would say it's a little oilier to start with. I was going to say something there, but I've just actually caught a whiff of it. Totally different. Totally different. Easily identifiable. The peat in it is much heavier, much more involved in the process. With this, the peat plays a little whiff in the background, just something to add a layer of complexity. With this, it's right there, boom, straight in front of you. This is a totally different smell. A lot more rubbery notes. You've got a certain level of tar that's not there. The peat's playing much more of a role here. It's actually to the point where it's almost Isla-esque. This being a blend, they've blended in a huge amount more peat. Very little of that light, that sort of citrusy notes that you're getting of the modern day version. It's almost like these two aren't connected. That's the truth. This is much more overworked, if you like. There's a lot more to work with in this than there is in the modern one. When you get a modern red label, it's really designed primarily to be mixed with soda water or ginger ale or whatever your mixer is. This has much more depth to it. With this, even though it's on it that it's 70 proof, it doesn't taste like that. It tastes oilier. It's got much heavier body to it. There is the peat that's coming through is so pronounced that I can totally get where the idea of peated whiskey being Scotch came from. It's a totally different animal. Lots of people could drink this one. I'm not so sure about this. I'm going to say there's quite a lot of people would have difficulty swallowing the old Johnnie Walker. That's probably where the reputation for the heavy peatedness comes from. It's probably not that there was lots of peated Scotch whiskies. No. It was probably much more to do with the fact that the best selling was much heavier peated. It would be really interesting. I don't think Diageo would ever let you know. It would be really interesting to go back and try and find out just how much they were putting in at the time. How heavy the peat percentage, the ppm. I'm sure you could go and get it analysed, but I don't have the resources of Diageo. I don't have the resources to do this. But anyone out there who does, if you want to get a sample of this, to find out what the ppm is, parts per million, by the way, of peat, it would be very interesting. So what's this like? Again, piles and piles and piles of peat. There's a very smooth fruit note in below it. Cooked fruit, baked note coming through. And a very wet leaf, almost, that nose to it. It's got a vegetative nose to it, which is different. Normally, grain whiskey gives that floral note, the very light floral notes coming in. This doesn't. It has a vegetative note to it, but it's not fresh. It's got an autumnal russet walking through leaf mulch note to it. It really has something totally different. And there's a fresh rubber. Got a better mouthfeel. It has a texture to it that the new one is quite light bodied. This is much more body to it. It has the finish isn't fantastic. I don't think it was ever going to be, because it's the cheap end of the market. I'm not disparaging anything there when I say something is cheap. So things that are cheap can be reasonably good value for money. What I'm saying with this is you have something that is totally different. There are slight similarities to this. The two of them, if you put them together, there are detectable notes that are a little generic. There's not what you would call a barley note off this now. And I'm just wondering is, over the last 5 decades and more, has barley changed to a point where what we perceive as barley now isn't the tastes and flavours of yesteryear? Is it something totally different? I'm beginning to think it possibly is. When I talk to various experts in their fields, like Grace O'Reilly and some other people, I have to say I'm beginning to get more and more convinced by their projects. The likes of what they're doing, heritage barleys, the organic, the biodynamic. We have focused so much on yield over the past while that maybe, and I'm not saying it's definite, I'm not totally convinced of all of that, but I'm beginning to think that there is definitely more to it. This it is a complexity that's not here. And remember, back in the day, this still was at the entry level, and yet it has a complexity of something much older, much pricier. I genuinely believe to get that level of complexity these days, I think you would have to pay considerably more than you would have to pay for this. How nice a whiskey this is? It's probably not something that I would rush out to buy or drink, because it does have a certain burnt note to it, which is the peat's there, but it's slightly acrid. But it's totally different. There's a little bit of heat. The sweetness is very, very little. There's not that much sweetness to it, which is surprising. It's quite funny that, because these days our palate is so conditioned to being fed sweet stuff that this is not there. It's totally different. It's actually quite savoury, which is normally what I would prefer. But there's a slight acrid note to it that puts me off. I'm not going to give it a score. That's not what I was here to do. It's a comparison. But do these things, guys. People wanting to buy different and new, exciting releases and bottles, but go and buy some of the old ones. You won't be disappointed. It gives you a totally new outlook. So that's part 2 of the Johnnie Walker story. So take care, folks. I'm going to do a little bit more work on these two. So take care.